Well, the term wisdom journalism refers to a kind of value added that I think has become necessary in journalism because of this digital technological revolution that we're undergoing. It's no longer enough, I think, just to say who, what, when, where. This happened yesterday, because on the internet we can find that out in so many places for free. So I think journalism organizations increasingly have to do more than that. They have to add wisdom. They have to be wise about what's going on in the world. I have to feel, if I'm looking at the news site of a newspaper, or if I'm looking at a newscast, that I'm getting more than is coming at me every day online. I mean, it's interesting that most people don't really understand the difference between news and journalism. I was at a conference at Columbia University near here, talking about my book, and we started talking about what journalism is, and there were all these journalism professors sitting around the table, and nobody seemed to have a good definition of journalism. But as I understand it, news, which I love, and I've written a book about the history of news that's halfway done before it gets to newspapers. News is information on current events that's shared with some portion of the public. Journalism is really the enterprise of doing that. And news can just be exchanged between people on the street. It still is, and it used to be much more that way. People would meet at a crossroads or sit around a campfire and exchange news. But journalism is when that becomes a professional enterprise, when people really devote energy to that. And that too has a fairly long history, going back to messengers and criers and pre-literate societies and professional newsletter writers, and then obviously the first printed newspapers. And the reason I say that news is in great shape is because we've just stumbled upon the greatest machine for distributing news in human history, even better than the printing press, and that of course is the internet. It's marvelous for this, and I can now get news from around the world. If there's an earthquake, a tsunami, a plane crash anywhere around the world, I can find that out and get information on that, close to instantly. But journalism has been suffering with this technological revolution because it's no longer obvious that we need journalists to bring us the news, and since this news comes for free so often, the question of how journalists are going to make money selling news has become a really important one in the United States, obviously, and around the world. We saw in the 20th century a move away from 19th century realism, just the facts. We saw this in art, with the rise of Cubism and abstract expressionism. We saw this in literature, with work by James Joyce and Virginia Woolf. I'm picking out just English language writers. We saw this in science to some extent with Einstein's philosophy and quantum mechanics, which, while still very much fact-based, made us realize that facts can change in certain interesting ways. We didn't see this move in journalism. As a matter of fact, realism seemed to become stronger in journalism, certainly in the United States and in Europe in the 20th century. And journalism seemed to be really the last redoubt of this kind of factual, just the facts view of the world. And one of the interesting things about this technological revolution that we're now going through in journalism is it seems to have been a catalyst for changing that. And I think journalists are starting to realize that just the facts, the who, what, when, where, he said this yesterday, are not enough, and that they need to do more, as painters once realized that they need to do more than just do what photography could do. or a scientist physicist realize that there's more to the world than just particles and planets orbiting in very clear ways. And so in some ways, I think this need to do more, this need to add wisdom, has been really good for journalism. It's brought it up with a lot of other fields into some new realms of thought, and new, more interesting realms of thought. I think what people don't understand is this era of fact-based reporting, just the facts, journalism, was an exception in human history. For most of human history, people told the news with analysis, with opinion. I mean, in the United States, one of our great heroes, Benjamin Franklin, he gave his opinion. As a matter of fact, he wrote, when he was talking about journalism, that journalism is the business of giving opinions. And that's how people thought of journalism in the early history of the United States. We're very proud of our First Amendment and of freedom of the press, but the press that was being protected there was not a press that had reporters. There were no real reporters. That was not a designation that journalists use in the 18th century when our system of freedom of the press was originated. That was a press that analyzed and gave opinions and was quite partisan. We even called it the partisan press. So there was a period in human history, a period of about a century and a half, when suddenly the journalism business became very much just about fact gathering. And in the United States and England and other parts of Europe, this really started in about the middle of the 19th century. And there were technological reasons behind this change too. It had to do with much faster printing presses that could actually compete with word of mouth on the street for yesterday's news. It had to do with the arrival of the telegraph and placing of cables under the oceans. And with this, it suddenly was possible to make a business out of selling news. Newspapers could get the news faster than people on the street could get it, and they could get it out, they could print it and sell it on the street faster than the local gossip or busybody could spread the news. And and further technological developments increased the speed. The telephone, for example, which much employed by journalists, and then obviously radio and television, which made it possible to distribute news instantly. And so the journalism into which I was born, and most of us was born, is a product of this particular technological revolution, which made it possible to make very large and successful businesses out of selling the facts on current events, out of telling people what happened yesterday or even earlier today. Well, let me just sort of finish the story. I think maybe I should finish the story I was telling. This period of a century and a half, when it was possible to make a big business out of essentially selling news, I believe is ending. And I think that's the crisis journalism around the world has been undergoing, because news is now available for free on the internet, and the internet is faster than any newspaper, pretty much, and every news organization from around the world is selling news this way. So I think the business of journalism has to change. And I think there always will be a need for people who do investigative reporting, for example, who go places that the rest of us can't go, to witness wars, to witness famines, to witness disasters. I'm not saying that needs to stop. I think there need to be people who are going to be reporting on politics and keeping our politicians honest and so on. But I think the real future of most journalism is going to be in what I call wisdom journalism, which is going to be really smart analysis of current events, helping us think about current events. I no longer think it's enough for most reporters to just have a notepad and a pen and write down what some politician is saying and then type up a story the next day saying, this is what that politician said. I think we need to know why that politician is saying that. I think we need to think a little about the consequences of that. I think we need to talk to some of the smartest people about politics and get their sense of it. And I think the reporter doing it has to be one of these smart people too. I think we're going to need a lot more specialists in journalism. So yes, there's going to be a room for, for people to gather information when they can get information that none of the rest of us can easily get online. But I think there's going to be a lot of room in journalism for people who are more educated, who are smarter, who are wiser, to help us understand what's going on in the world. And this is a very exciting thing for me because, there was something uninteresting and unchallenging in some ways about the kind of journalism that was that developed in the 20th century. There was, I taught it for a long time. I've been a journalism professor for a long time. And, I had students in my other classes reading great works of literature and reading the best analytical historians. And I was telling my students how to go cover a fire and say, well, how many fire trucks were there and how many people were injured? It didn't seem on that level. Now I feel like the journalism I'm teaching is on that level. So I need to teach people to really think about current events, to have a new perspectives on current events, to keep up with the best thinking on politics, economics, science, and to specialize themselves in many cases about these fields.